All right, home racing fans, it's time. It's the lowdown on lowering, and the question is, how low do you want to go, and are you willing to do what it takes to get it that way? So, depending on how you want to tune it, how far you're willing to go is going to dictate that. But let's just talk about a few things and see what we can come up with. All right, so we'll talk a little bit more about lowering and why you would want to, and obviously performance and looks are improved if you take the time to do some lowering. No question about that. These cars, many of them, when they were modeled, you'll notice there's an extreme amount of rake here. Mostly in the rear, they're very high. And that's because a lot of the photos that you see of these cars, Daytona, Talladega promotion photos, a lot of them did look that way. They were set up for the super speedway. And then when they got up to speed out there, well, these cars would just flatten down. So they were set up that way. Then if you look at prototype photos of a car from Bristol, back then, things were a little bit different. So, prototypically speaking, like I said, it's all up to you. Some people go to extreme lengths and really slam these cars down on the ground like lowriders. That's just not for me. I want them to still look like the real deal, and that just doesn't for me. If it does for you, go for it. So how much are we talking about here? Well, you know, when we talk about prototypes, I'll bring this one out. I modeled this car after a car that ran in USAC. So that's different than NASCAR, and it has been lowered. This car, prototypically speaking, this latest one here, the Tennessee Birdwalk, was an ARCA car. So, and it didn't look like, you know, this high. So, let's look at the difference. There. And you might think, well, that's not a whole lot. Well, I can tell you, it is. Performance-wise, out here in the corners, that makes a big difference. Same thing with the Fords. The Fords are the same way. Some of them just a little bit too high. And here's one that I've done a long time ago. And you can see the difference. And like I said, performance-wise out here on our track, a little bit goes a long way in the handling characteristics of these cars. Is like I said, but there's some things you're going to have to do to get them that way. And that's what we're going to talk about. So, like I said, get your Dremel warmed up, because that's what it's going to take. So we're going to start with the interior tray, and that's step number one in lowering these cars. And the reason why is that even though Carrera does use a decent lightweight interior, it's not a full interior, it's a half tray, the distance between this bottom part right here and the top of this motor is very, very close. So you're not going to get this body lowered in really any measurable amount unless you're willing to do some work in here to be able to drop the body down onto the chassis. So because of the height of the motor here and that distance here, basically this is where it all starts. So removing the interior, well, that's where the Dremel comes in. Here we go. I prefer using a milling bit like this. Does the job. You don't have to use one this big. It does the job. And you'll notice here, all 4 points here, when they install the interior, then they melt the plastic, these little post melts. That's what holds the tray in place. So, good old Dremel. Can make short work of that. And we're just going to grind this down and work on these post melts. Doesn't take very long. There. Now, you can see there that I've just taken the plastic off that's retaining it. You can already see a little bit of movement. It's ready to go. So that's my way of doing it. I guess there's other ways. This is just the one that I prefer. Now I'll do the other three and we'll get it apart. All right, so we sanded these off, and now this interior should pop right out. Come here, there you go, and it'll come right out. So there you have it. Now with the glass, there's two more spots right here on some models that you have to sand away post melts, and then the glass will come out. So there you go. And it's out. So the glass is out, interior is out. Now things are about to get real. All right, first step, we're going to do this in a series of steps, and you should too, to test the height that you like. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to sand off that post right there, flush with the mounting tabs. That's pretty easily done. Good old-fashioned Dremel, cut-off disc, doesn't take much, and you can just go right here and cut right through it. Perfect. Now a little sandpaper just to get rid of the flash, and we'll do the other side. All right, if you remember in the first series where we were working on the chassis, there's a little bit more we have to do now if we're going to start lowering. First of all, you see this edge right here? That's above your mounting post, like that. You're going to have to bring that down. Good old-fashioned X-Acto blade. You can just carve that off. Just a little bit of distance there. Carve it down and get it flush with that post. Pretty easy. So another modification you're going to have to do is, remember from part one, is we took the exhaust off. So I've removed the exhaust. And the reason for that is pretty simple. You look at a stock car, you'll see them sitting there like that, and you're not going to be able to lower the body very far with those in the way. It's just going to stop it. So if you want to keep the exhaust, we'll talk about the modifications to do to that later. But as we're testing our ride height, you're going to want to make sure that you remove them. Okay, time to give our first test here, see where we're at. Remember, we just covered this, that all we've done is we've just removed the material flush with those tabs. That's all we've done. So we haven't gone any lower. So let's see where we're at. So set it up, put it up here, back another dodge up, and there we go. Now, that doesn't seem like much, but I can tell you it makes a difference on race day. It just depends on what you want to do. So we're going to go further. I know I am. I'm going to go a little bit lower. But already you can see the difference here. But if that looks good to you and you're happy with that, well, then you're done. Well, at least for the lowering part. We're going to talk about the interior, but if that's as far as you want to go, then you can move on to the next step. As far as the front goes, I don't really do anything, and there's a good reason for that. You'll see that these posts are still intact. These are not, as we just showed. So, and the reason for that is when you put the chassis back on, you'll notice that there is not a lot of room between the very top edge of the tire and the body. Now, some guys will grind these tires down to nothing, make them look like low-profile LMPs. That's just not me. That's not the way I want it to look. If that's what you want to do, go right ahead. I'm not going to do that. I've already sanded and trued these stock tires. They're nice and true, and they still look like the prototype. They haven't been excessively sanded down, and that's kind of the way I like it. So the front being lowered doesn't really bother me. We've already done the guide mod. We've got everything straight there, so that's good enough for me. So we're just talking about the rear in general. But like I said just a minute ago, if you're happy with that stance, if that's what you want it to look like, then you don't have to do any more cutting back here. But we are. We're going to do that. So we'll show you that next.